Thanks for checking out this week's FinPrep Trading and Investment video newsletter. Looking at the year-to-date scoreboards, slight gains there for U.S. stocks with NASDAQ still at approximately 2x outperformance on the S&P. Bonds did have a pretty significant week here. Recall last week they were all stacked upon each other in and around that 0.3, 0.5 zone, but really what we're witnessing here is duration in action with our long end of the yield curve pulling ahead to the greatest extent. So good, strong beginning of what may be a breakout of that wedge pattern to the upside on TLT. We'll go ahead and look at that chart for a better picture of that. Silver here, finally on the top of this particular set of the investment universe. Given and this has happened in quite a few times during the extent of its bear market. Which then implies that it quickly reverses once the seasonality kicks in and so forth. Main question here is, in the longer term, is 2017 going to be any different? Is this a year precious metals can finally break out of its bear market and enter a bull market? Even if not the case, considerable outperformance could still play out. So we'll look at SLV there and as well as GLD. Copper did lose a few points. Commodity currency still holding up fairly well. Japanese yen, given its high correlation to precious metals, it is important to note that it did add about approximately a point there. So pretty decent little showing there on the Japanese yen. And greatest or most significant change potentially was the slight flipping of the sign on the EUR euro, really. So we'll take a look at FXE ETF to get a better sense on what that may portend for the UP dollar index chart. So S&P, so SPY here, really what we had is gap up for beginning of week and moving sideways into that 9 EMA. And just clearly what you can see, especially taking out that 230, is we may be entering now with the 9 EMA falling along with price. Basically a period of trending as we had in QQQ once that takeout of that 120, 122 did take hold. So although we have overbought conditions on our fast stochastics, the more appropriate measure then would be MACD. So MACD at 2.6 here. We have seen periods where it's extended, although we have seen periods where it got higher. So approximately 3 and 2.8 and so forth. So could there be further room to run to the upside? Sure. But definitely keeping a look for any potential signs of reversal. So one such potential sign was on our transports average, basically a down week, failure to take out new highs, although what we did have is a nice run off that 50-day moving average and close near high of day to close out the week on Friday. So the type of action you'd want to see to give further credence to a continuance of the move to the upside. Similarly with Russell, small caps, IWM ETF here. Yes, slight marginal new highs there beginning of week, only to reverse. On the other hand, holding up on one of your short-term day moving averages and closing near high of day. So again, the type of action you want to see, but we'll keep a look to see if any further developments out of Russell portend for downside. TLT here, the primary chart of the week. What we did have, recall, is basically that wedge pattern triangle essentially. So with a potential breakout at approximately 120.5 here, mostly coming on Friday, so gap up and then closing near high of day, so strong, the type of action you want to see, implying a potential target of 126.5 to the upside should we get further into the move. If this doesn't just reverse next week, we shall see. With the 20 weekly moving average bearing down upon us, basically where we are, which is 122.30. So the question is, can this move build upon itself, or will it get stopped out at essentially this 20? And basically the long-awaited bullish crossover on that weekly MACD. Recall we had that deep oversold, so to speak, territory on the weekly MACD, then beginning to trend up and did cross over actually, looks like last week, and then we got some confirmation, so to speak, some upward movement last week, and really there on Friday. So would want to see it continue to that move relatively soon. GLD. GLD, basically what we see is a strong end of the week, gap up and closing near high of days, but below your longer term day moving average, your 200 and 250. Closing above, very importantly, closing above your 200 week moving average, although currently below your 50 week. So is this all gold has to give? Well, silver seems to suggest that the precious metals are still faring fairly well. With your 9 EMA in trending fashion, basically more or less defining this move off that approximately fourth, fifth, whatever, primary touch of that downward price channel and breaking out, pretty considerably now here above the 200-day moving average, and even for the time being your 200-week moving average. So should that continue to hold and build, this argues quite favorably then for the GDXJ, which had a down week. So it would look. But basically what appears to be flagging out, right? So what we had is basically being stopped at that 250-week moving average, and here we're approaching your rising 50-week moving average, and what very well could be a bull flag rather. So any movement in around this 38 and a half, it would be important to see if it holds, and it could very well be the precursor, obviously particularly if the metals continue to forge ahead So this could be the beginning of a move out of that pattern there for GDXJ. Looking at FXY, it is still holding this short-term trend line, so even though it did take a bit on the chin on Tuesday, post-holiday, did make a nice little run, took out, high of last week, so that was fairly important there for FXY, obviously waiting for an eventual takeout of the 86.40, which would really kind of give further ignition then to the precious metals. FXE Euro, let's look at Euro. Given its heavy weighting, the UUP, it's a very important component. So basically what it closed on was that 50-day moving average last week. So again, hard gap down to begin the week, only to come in and retest that 50-day moving average and now declining 90 MA, and a pretty sound rejection with closing near low of day. So if this is the beginning of a move downward in FXE on the weekly chart here, longer term stretching all the way back to 08, what we have here is another pretty pronounced downward channel, fifth primary touch, and it looks like it met pretty considerable resistance on that 20-week moving average in the magenta there. So again, that's sort of the concern or question then with TLT is it going to find resistance on the 20 declining week moving average? But nonetheless, with Euro, the question here is if this down move continues to pick up steam, does it close out and start to approach parity, and goodness knows even take out this this longer term price channel to the downside, which would imply further strength for UUP. So that is sort of one interesting view for what we may expect in months to come. But that's basically it for this week, guys. Take